I'm the oldest of 5 kids. Growing up, we lived on our family farm that has been lived in by my dad's family since the 1700s. So there's a lot of people who have lived and died there before. Growing up, I was always afraid of ghosts, especially anything that would hurt me. But it wasn't until I was about 8 that I realized ghosts can be kind of nice too. Not all of them want to scare you. Although I was little, I remember it all pretty vividly. I was sitting on the driveway with my dog playing with chalk, when my dog sat up and looked over at the old barn about 30 yards away. I didn't really care what my dog saw, but something kind of pulled me to look over there. And when I did, that's when I saw a younger looking woman with her hair done up, wearing a rose-colored dress. As soon as I saw her though, she was gone. She didn't dissipate or fade away. It's like she was never even there to begin with. Like I said, I was 8 at the time, so I ran inside and started crying to my mum about a woman over the barn. So she went out and looked around and there was nothing. Fast forward to dinner that night. She brings it up to my dad, who curiously asks what she looked like. I explain her to him, and as soon as I mention the dress, he puts his fork down and goes to grab a shoebox from the parlor. He rifles through a bit before pulling out an old picture of the exact woman that I saw by the barn. When I confirmed that was her, my dad sat down with a tear in his eye and explained it was his mum, my grandmother. She died when he was 6, so I never met her and had no idea what she looked like. But my dad guessed her spirit had just been hanging out keeping an eye on me while I played, because that rose-colored dress was her favorite, and was the dress she was buried in. So, this started about 3 years ago, when I was about 18. I was using Grindr, and someone called Rando messaged me. We started talking with the usual conversation starters. How are you? What are you up to? And then Rando began to sound rather depressed. He was moaning about his insecurities and how everyone hated him, and occasionally talking about how he should just end it all. Me being the nice person that I am, I try finding something about him that I could compliment on and try to make him feel better, that sort of thing. Or bring a smile at the least. And that's when things began to get heavy. Brando began deflecting my compliments, calling me a liar or a user, and saying that I'm just trying to make fun of him. I tried my best to reassure him that my compliments were genuine, because I hate seeing people depressed or down. It's just in my nature to bring joy to people. Now, I have been in his shoes before, with severe insecurities, so I know how he felt. After he finally began to believe that my compliments were real, he started to get very attached to me and started berating me with messages. He'd send me 20 in one go, and if I didn't reply within about 5 seconds, he'd be like, "Oh, I guess you found someone better to talk to. You're like all the rest." And it began to get frustrating at this point. Now, I could have just blocked him and saved me from the headache, but I have anxiety and feared that he'd turn up at my door someday and do something drastic if I'd blocked him. He also tried sending me nudes to grab my attention when I didn't reply, literally instantly to his messages, and it got worse and worse from here. Eventually, he told me he'd be in my town over the weekend and began to get very pushy about meeting up somewhere and doing some things. I didn't reply. He flips out and started finding me on different social medias to keep tabs on me. Facebook messages, friend requests, Instagram follows. I went out on a night out with some friends of mine, and at the time forgot he was in town over the weekend, and he saw me walking down the street and ran up to me, bawling his eyes out about me trying to avoid him, and began begging for my phone number and house address and whether he could join us on our night out. And when we politely refused, He followed us further and tried forcing drinks into my hand when we got to the bar. Infuriated by how clingy he was being, I went home, just to realize he boarded the same bus as me and followed me back to my place before he finally vanished. He started messaging me on Grindr about how he was going to visit me someday and tried to find my friends in order to get my phone number. I finally snapped at this point and blocked him and thought I was done with him. This whole experience has really put me off dating people with severe insecurities out of fear that something like this would happen again. And I've been trying to go against my nature and avoid complimenting people too much, to avoid something like this again. It's been 3 years and I haven't seen him since. When I was living in San Francisco, I sailed in a beer can league every Wednesday. Generally, the conditions are not so bad, and if it is, we can reduce the sail area, which is called reefing. Anyway, one evening we were faced with winds of around 25 knots, gusting up to 30. Honestly, they should have probably cancelled the race, but it was near the end of the season and people were starting to get pretty competitive. Fast forward to the race. We have rounded the furthest buoy and are heading backwards towards the finish line, when we see that another of the boats has gotten their shroud hung up on a buoy. Another boat was already rendering assistance, so we go and finish the race without incident. As we are motoring around the harbour, having our last post-cruise beer, the Coast Guard shows up with a helicopter and powerboat, sirens blazing. The boat launches and they go out to rescue the stranded racers. As people start to trickle into the clubhouse, we learned what happened. Apparently the skipper was cutting it close to the buoy like we did, right when a gust hit him. The shrouds were caught on the buoy, which ended up pulling the mast down, killing one of his crew and breaking the neck of another. The skipper walked away unscathed. There were only a few boats in our fleet, and we were all pretty close. I knew every person in the league by name. I think there was a ghost of a little girl in a house I lived in West Atlanta. One summer day I was home alone and left but forgot my sunglasses. I went back to the house to look for them. I said out loud, "I just had them." And immediately a sing-song voice mockingly replied, "I just had them." I said out loud, "And I don't need them," and noped out of there. A few weeks later, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner. My 4-year-old son was watching Super Y. I had full view of him. We were the only ones home. On the show, the character Wyatt asks, "What's your name?" And I hear, "Angel, clear as day." My son hadn't said anything, didn't react, and just kept mumming because I wasn't really scared. I was just startled. I mean, the ghost is watching PBS. The other odd thing that happened is a light bulb had screwed out of the dining room chandelier and placed on a table 3 feet away. Scarves I had draped over a hook in my bedroom somehow got tied, and only adults could reach them, and my husband swore he hadn't done it either. And I believed him, because his reaction was that of being so incredibly freaked out. This didn't happen to me, but to my grandfather, who is a war veteran. Shortly after the Korean War, he and some of his friends had come back home and naturally celebrated their return. They lived in a very rural part of Southern California at the time, and to this day, the population is at peak, around 200 people. Anyway, my grandfather was driving home in the dead of night, with his friends piled in the car and sleeping aside from his buddy-riding shotgun. They were in the middle of the desert with nothing for miles, so it naturally should have been an easy-going ride home. My grandfather suddenly saw a strange dark figure up ahead, which looked like a person, and quickly began swerving out of the way to avoid hitting the guy. Right before he swerved, he got a better look at the person and saw he was completely draped in black robes. They pulled over after he swerved, and he did a quick double check, and the black-robed person was nowhere to be seen. The guys sleeping didn't see anything, but apparently the buddy-riding shotgun saw it too. To this day, when my grandfather told me the story, he was 100% sure it was death. He didn't understand why he was there or for what, but that glimpse caught him right before he swerved and had apparently been proof enough to make him think it had been death itself. I lived off the base of Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs, and during the spring and summer I spent a lot of time in the mountains. By far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in those mountains was an hour-long lightning storm that ended up putting me and two of my buddies in quite a bit of danger. 5 of us came up together in a Jeep Wrangler and a Hummer, and while on our way, we got a phone call from someone saying they would meet us. Great! Directions to the spot are given, as well as directions to a go-to spot that was very easy to find off a main road before it got woody, in case they could not find our camping spot. After a certain amount of time would pass, one of us would leave for the go-to spot and guide the third car back. This is sometimes how we go about things to plan around loss of cell service. Well, enough time passed for 2 of us to hop into the Hummer and go find our other friend. This left 3 of us to hang out, which was no problem until the storm hit. If you've never been on the Front Range of Colorado during hail season, then you won't understand how very devastating and quick a storm can form, and oddly enough break up and then calm, seemingly out of nowhere a light drizzle, which quickly turned to heavy rain, and then marble-sized hail. Just as quickly as the storm hit us, we realized our biggest problem. The Jeep only had 2 seats, and it's filled up with camping supplies, a very nice telescope, and other odds and ends. There was no room for 3 people, period. It was unspoken that we should not leave someone outside in the hail, nor would just one of us go into the Jeep. We were in this. Getting obliterated by rain and annoyed by some decent hail, the electricity started flying. We were in a canyon, so thunder was rolling and echoing and sounding as if Zeus had just found out I just gave Calliope a poke and never returned her call. The noise was terrifying. We found a blue tarp in the back of the Jeep and were just able to tie it to a few trees to at least shelter us from the rain. But it was one particular bolt of lightning that changed my respect for the power of the Rockies. About 50 feet from where we were hurdled was a fence that outlined the property of a very large ranch. You couldn't see the ranch by any means, but the fence was clear as day, as well as a large pillar that stuck from the ground with a sign that said, "Warning, trespassers may be shot," or something similar bolted to it. While we were waiting for the storm to pass, and all the while among dozens of very loud and bright clashes of thunder and lightning, a massive bolt bends around the mountain, of which's base we were against, and strikes onto this post, absolutely frying it. It was as if the bolt clung to the post for a solid 2 to 3 seconds. Needless to say, We were horrified because this was considerably less than 100 feet away, and this bolt was huge. The most disturbing part of it was for about 10 seconds after the bolt had gone away, that trespassing sign was glowing molten red and vibrated so loudly that we could hear it over the rest of the storm. Our friends in the Hummer returned perhaps 45 minutes after this, and by then, the sky was clear and it wasn't 75 degrees again.